bloomberg.com and via the Bloomberg Business app. A very good morning from London. I'm Roger Hearing.
And I'm Naira Chahich. Good morning, everyone. It is 8:01 a.m. in London, 9:01 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. Roger, it's one of those...
Good morning, everybody. I'm placing an order for euro. I'm placing an order to sell short at 127.56. So and it's already executed at 127.56.
moment. Actually, let's see if I can see right now. We open down 3%, so about the same as the move that we saw in Hong Kong. And this is really after HSBC was mentioned as a potential target after the blast from Pompeo. It's actually something that Bloomberg News has been reporting, citing people familiar, that HSBC was specifically mentioned as a potential target. And of course, even prior to this, HSBC, Roger's been walking this political tightrope because it's been looking to further push into certain parts of Asia, into Hong Kong as well. China specifically, it endorsed China's new security law, and it's now drawing further criticism from politicians in the US and the UK.
Yeah, and of course the big story here in the UK today is Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, who's going to get up in about 4 hours' time and deliver his speech, much anticipated, much leaked, actually. I mean, one wonders if there's anything in it that we don't already know.
Yeah, you start to question whether it's going to be in some way underwhelming in the same way that Boris Johnson's build proposition was, because, of course, even more expectations have been put on it. Because of that, of course, the big focus is expected to be on employment and, in particular, on youth employment, Roger.
Yeah, and the other thing that's hanging over it all, of course, is how to pay for it. He's not going to tell us today about that, but I suspect in the background will be a sense of what's going to happen with Brexit, because there's no question that is going to affect the UK economy dramatically. And overnight we had these headlines on the Bloomberg terminal about Boris Johnson and Chancellor Angela Merkel having a talk, and Boris Johnson making it very clear, we knew it already, but he's underlining it, that Britain was prepared to walk away without a deal.
The bond markets, Roger, seem to be very gloomy on the outlook for the UK, at least in the long term. The 30-year gilt yield is not far off Japan's. You start to think of phrases like Japanification for the UK, and it's particularly interesting given all the spending, the fiscal spending that's on the cards, the issuance and the supply that's going to come through. Because of that, you would expect yields to be higher, but that 30-year yield has really come down, which kind of shows the gloom with investors. In terms of gloom as well, it wasn't exactly upbeat, the comments that we got from Richard Clarida of the Fed, or Raphael Bostic either, and Vice Chair Clarida saying there's more that we will do if needed. The comments very much seem to be we're the backstop. We're here as a backstop.
And, of course, we heard Haldane from the Bank of England as well, talking about, in general, the global economy and one of those difficult periods he's known. So a lot of interesting talk from the central bankers about quite the scale of what they've got to take on.
Now, that said, Haldane did make the comment "so far, so V," which sounded very upbeat. But looking to the market, 4.5 minutes into the equity market open, Roger, definitely not an upbeat tone today. The Stock 600 is down 0.6% across regional equity benchmarks. The FTSE 100 down 0.6%. The CAC 40 is lower by 0.9%. The DAX moving lower. I'm going down one line too low. Let's start again. FTSE 100 down 0.6%. CAC 40 is down 0.9%. The DAX is down 0.5%. The IBEX lower by more than 1%, and the FTSE MIB lower by 0.5%. We did actually see stocks end lower in the US session yesterday. They did in Europe too, but of course the steam was taken out of the tech stocks in the US, so the Nasdaq ended in the red as well. Futures not giving us a lot of direction. Dow and S&P futures dead flat. Nasdaq futures actually edge into the green. In terms of yields, the 10-year yield edged higher in the Asian session, but it's fallen back and it's steady now around a 64 handle. 10-year bund yield down a basis point. That sort of matches up with the risk off we're seeing in equities. negative 44. 10-year gilt yield slips 2 basis points ahead of the announcement by UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak. We move towards 15 basis points on that 10-year gilt yield. In FX, the Bloomberg Dollar Index has been pretty steady through the Asian session, and it's staying like that. The pound, interestingly, ever so slightly on the front foot, up just 0.1%. And then taking a look at commodities, oil slipping slightly, WTI at 40.46, down 0.4%. Brent trades at 42.94. Gold at $1,795 an ounce, so approaching that 1,800 level and near a 2011 high. Roger.
Right, let's have a look at what the stocks are to watch this morning. Bloomberg's Sam Unstead joins us down the line. Sam, good morning to you. Now, this is a fascinating story. Boohoo, because we had those reports in the papers over the weekend about sweatshops in Leicester paying less than the minimum wage. A great deal of concern about that. And also, they might have been a source for what we saw in Leicester in terms of a virus surge there. How are their shares doing today?
Yeah, good morning, guys. The Boohoo shares have been hit very hard over the last 2 days, but they're down again today, just over 3% at the moment. I think the big concern here is not so much what's happened in the last 2 days, but that the response has taken 2 days to come. There's also a concern that the Boohoo products are being dropped by other sellers, so Amazon, Zalando. These are major places for Boohoo to sell outside of their own website. So the picture is looking much bleaker for them at the moment, and it'll be interesting to now see how they react and then how the market reacts to what Boohoo do to try to soothe those concerns.
Yeah, because they talk about an independent review, of course. Their shares down 2.8% this morning. I should say, of course, they have said that they are also very much disputing a lot of what's in the press about them. But let's move on to another company in the news focus, HSBC, of course. A lot, as we were talking about at the top of the program, a lot of pressure from the US, perhaps specifically on HSBC and its position in Hong Kong from the Americans. How are they looking today?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, actually, what you guys said just a little earlier is I think, exactly right. The concern about the US undermining the Hong Kong dollar peg, that seems to be, most traders are quite skeptical that would happen. But what it indicates is just an extra, the continued looking from the US for options of how to punish China via Hong Kong. And HSBC has a huge presence in Hong Kong. I've noticed that HSBC is down 3.6%. I've noticed Standard Chartered as well, which has a big Hong Kong presence. They're also down this morning. It's more about what this could augur for the future rather than the reports we've seen so far.
Indeed. And finally, of course, Delivery Hero. They're raising more money. They're selling up to 1.5 billion euros in convertible bonds.
Yeah, so this is one of the sectors, Delivery Hero, a food delivery or takeout delivery company. It's one of the sectors that's been a big winner of the lockdown because people have been ordering in much more than they did because restaurants have been closed. They're raising quite a large amount of money, and so this can either indicate that they're going to invest much more in their own network, could well mean that they intend to go out and buy. This is a sector where there's been a lot of consolidation. Just earlier this week, we had Uber buying Postmates as the latest sign of that. So it'll be now interesting to see what Delivery Hero do with that money. Their shares are lower this morning. That's mostly due to a technical adjustment because of the convertible bonds. But most analysts pretty positive on what seems like quite a confident move from the company.
Yeah, they're down 1.9% this morning. Thanks so much indeed, Sam Unstead there with Shares to Watch.
Thanks so much, Roger. Let's get to our top stories. Advisors to US President Donald Trump are said to have proposed that the US take steps to undermine Hong Kong's currency peg. But as Bloomberg's Brian Curtis reports from Hong Kong, traders have mostly scoffed at the idea.
One trader called it a wacky idea, one that has been spectacularly unsuccessful in the past. And the Hong Kong dollar has been steady all day at the strong end of its trading range. The idea is that breaking the peg would punish China for imposing a national security law on Hong Kong. But it wouldn't be easy, and there are several reasons why the market is yawning at the idea. Hong Kong has nearly $500 billion of reserves, and there's something like $5 trillion US deposited in Hong Kong banks. And Hong Kong's de facto central bank is backed up by the People's Bank of China. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg, Daybreak Europe.
And here in the UK, the Chancellor is going to give a major speech later detailing plans to help the economy recover from the virus. Rishi Sunak will reveal a £2 billion scheme to tackle youth unemployment. The same amount's also going into making households more energy efficient. And there's also like to be a stamp duty holiday for the property market.
Boris Johnson is again warning the UK is ready to leave the EU without a trade deal if the bloc won't compromise. The Prime Minister made the comments in a call to German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Negotiations are still stuck over key questions, including how far Britain will be able to loosen its regulations and still enjoy single market access.
And in top corporate news, Barclays has reached out to potential candidates to gauge their interest in the top job. That's as part of long-term succession planning to replace the chief executive, Jess Staley. Sources tell Bloomberg no formal search is underway, but that Staley could leave the lender as soon as next year. There's increasing activist pressure to replace him as CEO.
Meanwhile, with the Fed, the Federal Reserve is signalling it has scope for more policy action if the economy stalls. Vice Chairman Richard Clarida says the central bank can turn to more forward guidance and asset purchases. Atlanta Fed Chief Raphael Bostic cautioned the renewed spread of COVID-19 may threaten the pace of the recovery.
Right, let's get the latest now in global news with Leanne Gerrans. And Leanne, good morning. You begin with what's going on in America in regard to the WHO.
Yes, indeed, Roger. Good morning. So the White House has made good on its threats to leave the World Health Organization. The Trump administration has sent a letter to the agency giving it a one-year notice that it plans to quit. President Donald Trump says the international body has been too differential to China in its handling of the pandemic. The move comes as virus cases in the U.S. get close to 3 million. And the World Health Organization will send a mission to China this weekend to begin preparations to study the origins of coronavirus. The WHO's Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has more on the upcoming investigation.
All preparations have been finalized, and WHO experts will be traveling to China this weekend to prepare scientific plans with their Chinese counterparts for identifying the zoonotic sources of the disease. The mission objective is to advance the understanding of animal hosts for COVID-19 and ascertain how the disease jumped between animals and humans.
Now, civil rights groups have criticized Facebook after a meeting with top executives, including CEO Mark Zuckerberg. The groups say the social network is not taking demands to combat hate speech seriously. One said Facebook treated the hour-long video conference like a PR exercise. Facebook says it wants the platform to be hate-free, but it knows it will be judged by its actions, not its words. And Brazil's president has tested positive for COVID-19, a disease he spent months claiming poses little risk. Jair Bolsonaro has called the virus a little flu and rallied against lockdown measures despite more than 65,000 deaths in his country. He announced his positive test in a bizarre news conference before stepping back from reporters and removing his face mask.
Who wants to see my face? I'm fine, calm, thank God, all in peace. Thanks to those who prayed for me, were supporting me. I'm fine, thank God. Those who criticised me, there's no problem, you can continue criticising.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Take the Bond Challenge. Use the free Interactive Brokers Bond Scanner to search their deep availability of U.S. government securities, 38,000 global corporate bonds, and 850,000 municipals. IBKR passes through the highest of all bids and lowest of all offers received at the electronic venues it accesses. We do not widen spreads, apply hidden fees, or mark up quotes. How many basis points does your current broker keep? Find out at ibkr.com/bonds.
You took the first step and quit smoking, but even former smokers may still be at risk for lung cancer. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know about a new low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early. It takes only 60 seconds and could save your life. You took the first step, now take the next. Visit SaveByTheScan.org for a simple quiz to see if you're eligible and talk to your doctor about screening. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Tom Keene.
Early back to school in London, and in America there is that mystery of August and into September. Someone looking at this very carefully is Mohammed Yunus. He is with Gallup. He does phenomenal polling on the fabric of America, what we are thinking right now. Is it a panic, Mohammed, from sea to shining sea about getting the cherubs back to school?
There's definitely demand and interest in seeing that. One thing we were just discussing is as the summer rolls on, what we're going to be doing with our panel as a continuation of the COVID coverage is really get deeper into how old kids are in the household and whether or not parents want them to go back, feel like they're willing to go back. A tricky thing about this is if you would have asked these questions just 2 weeks ago here in the U.S., you would have gotten very different responses. So as the summer trails on, I think a lot of people are really going to be watching the infection rates much more than they start thinking about even schools reopening. We've seen locations here really roll back dramatically in many cities. They're sort of phasing out the quarantine. But, you know, it's definitely a mixed result in terms of the close of last semester and how students experienced online learning, and parents certainly weren't thrilled beyond their minds at how it went.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning, I'm Roger Hearing with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. And 17 minutes into the European opening, we see what had been a risk-off session amongst much of Asia, except China being very much brought in. Stock 600 down 0.5%, FTSE 100 down 0.5% as well. CAC down 0.7%, the DAC down 0.4%, the IBEX down 1.13%, and the FTSE MIB down 0.2%. Also, well, in fact, actually now US futures have gone into the green, interestingly. S&P 500 up 0.1%, Dow the same. Nasdaq down up 0.25%, so perhaps a little bit more risk-on sense there. If we're looking to the bond market right now, US 10-year benchmark treasuries, a little move, 64 basis points is the handle. But in terms of bunds, we're seeing the yield down by 1 basis point, negative 0.44 is where we find that. Gilts, 0.16 basis points, that's also down 1 basis point. Looking to oil at the moment, $40.45 the barrel is where we find WTI, that's down 0.4%. Brent down 0.3%, $42.92 the barrel. In terms of the dollar itself, it's weaker by 0.1% on the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. Interesting, the pound a little stronger, up just over 0.1% on cable at 1.2561. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world. Leanne.
The World Health Organization has acknowledged evidence that coronavirus can be spread by tiny particles suspended in the air. An official says airborne transmission cannot be ruled out in crowded, closed or poorly ventilated settings. If the evidence is confirmed, it may affect guidelines for indoor spaces. President Donald Trump's estranged niece is releasing a tell-all memoir next week. Bloomberg News has obtained a copy of the book. In it, Mary Trump says she watched as the president shredded norms, endangered alliances, and trod on the vulnerable. A White House spokeswoman says the book is full of falsehoods. The president's brother, her uncle, had sued to block its publication. And the Portuguese Prime Minister says talks are underway with British officials about travel corridors between the two countries. Portugal was left off a list of destinations people can go to without having to quarantine when they arrive back into England. Antonio Costa says his foreign minister has had a long conversation with his UK counterpart. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now, UK Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak is said to unveil a £2 billion programme to pay the wages of more than 200,000 young workers. It's the centrepiece of the government's plan to protect, support and create jobs. Sunak will announce his strategy to guide the UK economy through the next phase of the pandemic later today. It's a major task as the UK government continues to support over 12 million jobs. Well, joining us now is Caris Roberts, Chief Executive of think tank, the Institute for Public Policy Research. Caris, great to have you on the show with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. You've done a lot of work around this topic, particularly around the employment prospects for young workers post-COVID. We've got a potential number, £2 billion, but what actually needs to be done concretely to protect the jobs? Let's start initially of young people.
Well, good morning. I think the first thing to say is that the announcement that the government is paying attention to this is really good news. So what might happen during this crisis is if young people come out of education and there's no job for them to go to, it's very likely that they might get stuck in a cycle of unemployment, and that can be really damaging to their prospects as well as the economy. Our analysis shows that actually youth unemployment could double by the end of the year. So it's very welcome that the government's paying attention to this. I think there are a few things that need to be paid attention to in the design of the scheme to make sure that it really works. And that includes making sure that those are good jobs. So just pushing young people into jobs that aren't actually going to develop their skills, the stereotype of making the tea or in an office environment or just in a pound shop, for instance. I think that was one example from the last recession, might not develop their skills. So these have to be good jobs, and that means that a locally led approach is going to be really important there. But it's also important that we bear in mind that for lots of young people, education might be a really good place to be right now. So that we're not, again, pushing young people into jobs that aren't useful for them, but instead investing in their futures and through the different ways that could be achieved.
Well, Caris, I was going to pick up on that exact point because there's obviously training is vitally important and apprenticeships being part of that. I mean, do you expect...
Question about scale. And I'd come back to this on lots of the different points of today's speech, is that Boris Johnson has set an extremely high bar last week with his Rooseveltian language. But so far the announcements fall somewhat short of that. And that includes with this scheme, we need to make sure that there's proper investment there to get that working really effectively.
You talked about youth unemployment and by your estimates, Caris, potentially doubling post-COVID. What do you expect the landscape of the UK labour market to look like more broadly?
So it's a tricky question, and there have been various different estimates. I think unemployment is very likely to spike when we see the job retention scheme wound down, which is due to end in October, but of course there are measures already asking employers to contribute more, and I think that is behind a lot of the job layoff announcements that we're hearing at the moment. So there's a really important job of how the government is going to prevent for instance, the Bank of England's estimate of 10% unemployment by the end of the year. I've seen some slightly more optimistic estimates in recent days. It might be more like 6%. Those are still really high amounts and far higher than what we're used to in the economy. So he's got some plans to increase the number of advisors in job centres, for instance, and also there's been announcements of green investment. But again, it comes back to scale. So Roosevelt, through the New Deal, invested about 40% of GDP to create jobs. And today, Germany is investing approximately 40 billion euros in stimulus spending towards green projects. So really, the government needs to go beyond the baby steps that it's taking to get us to a point where we actually can prevent that mass unemployment. And we need to make sure that they're not pulling away that support, the job retention scheme, too quickly.
Caris, I mean, a lot of what the problem is going to be is that companies have gone or will go very quickly, ones that have not survived. And the problem surely is going to be new business startups is quite a difficult thing to do, but that's what's going to be needed in order to try and bring that jobless total down. I mean, what sort of support can the government give to that?
Well, I wouldn't entirely agree that we just let the businesses that are struggling collapse. I mean, certainly some of this demand is probably structurally gone, which means that, of course, those jobs might not come back. But a lot of it can be expected to return. And so what's really important is tiding those businesses over, assuming they're the sorts of industries who want to support. But then, obviously, new business startups are going to be really important. The thing that I would say is most important is that government investment can give confidence to businesses, can give confidence to entrepreneurs that the economy is going to get better. Because the most important thing, if you're starting a business, is to know that you're going to have customers who are going to want to be trading with you. So that means investment by the government. It also means fixing the public health crisis, because too often we detach the public health crisis from the economics, I think. And we know that people are going to be confidently spending when they can see that there's an end to this.
Yeah, and that's a really important point about finally realising that a strong healthcare system can mean a strong economy as well. Karis, on the green economy that you mentioned as well, of course, we got a figure earlier this week about the UK pumping £3 billion into environmental projects, which again sort of pales in comparison to some other countries' commitment to spending on the green economy. But how will that actually give a broad-based boost to jobs, or just to certain sectors like construction, for example?
So I think the retrofit programme is a really good idea. I'm very glad to see that the government is finally getting its act together on this. But as you say, again, the amounts are not enough. So about £30 billion of investment is needed every year.
The big Volkswagen event is now on. If you're after a new Volkswagen, we offer to pay your first 3 months finance payments and an additional £500 to £1,000 contribution to your deposit at 3.8% APR representative. Hello, sir. Do any take your fancy?
Well, yes, a new Golf or T-Cross. A Tiguan. No, Passat. Oh, I need to sit down.
Here, have a seat.
The big Volkswagen event. With every type of car on offer, you may have trouble choosing. With Solutions Personal Contract Plan until 12th of July, excludes e-Golf at participating retailers only. Minimum 46 months to receive 3 months finance payments. Indemnities may be required. Volkswagen Finance. Contact your local retailer to book an appointment.
When your tenants have a blown fuse box and you've got a busy day ahead, superheroes crashing through the wall isn't going to help anyone. With Direct Line Landlord Emergency added to your policy, we're on it to send a rather super electrician in 4 hours before you've tucked into your lunch. We can also assemble plumbers, locksmiths, glaziers and drainage engineers. Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. We're on it. Direct Line. Residential properties. Optional add-on up to £1,500 per call-out. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
At Halfords, we're here to get you where you want to be. We fit car tyres for over 500,000 customers every year. We could fit yours at one of over 350 garages, or even on your driveway with our mobile experts, which means you can safely hit the road again and surprise that special someone.
Happy birthday!
From tyre fittings to MOTs, there really is no job too big or too small. Halfords, for life's journeys.
Eurotunnel Le Château is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Château, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Château, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
Conjuring images of Roosevelt, and so far they haven't met that bar.
Karis, thank you so much for that. Karis Roberts there, Chief Executive of the think tank, the Institute for Public Policy Research, looking ahead to Rishi Sunak's announcement coming live here on Bloomberg Radio at just after midday today.
Yeah, just a few hours away. It's 8:30 a.m. in London, 9:30 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels, and you're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe with myself, Naira Chehich, alongside Roger Hearing. Let's get to the markets. 30 minutes into the equity market open. The Stock 600 is coming off its lows, but we are still in the red, down 0.3%. So on a second day of declines, the global equity rally lost steam yesterday, and it's yet to pick up again in today's session. FTSE 100 down 0.2%, the CAC 40 down 0.4%, the DAX down 0.2%. IBEX lower by 1%. The FTSE MIB treads water. We did see US benchmarks, the S&P 500 and NASDAQ ended the red yesterday. So again, some of that rally, particularly in tech stocks, definitely losing a little bit of its luster. But we are seeing US futures actually head into positive territory now. S&P E-minis up 0.25 percentage point. NASDAQ futures up 0.3%. Dow futures up 0.2%. So a little bit of mixed signals there from European equities versus US futures. The 10-year Treasury yield moves up a basis point, 65 handle, but we see European yields move lower. 10-year Bund yield down a basis point, -44. 10-year gilt yield ahead of the announcement from the UK Chancellor, down 2 basis points on a 16 handle. In FX, we've seen the Bloomberg Dollar Index pretty much unchanged for a lot of the Asian session, but now we're seeing some of those G10 currencies, most of them in fact, pick up some steam. So the dollar edges into the red overall, which does perhaps point to a little bit more risk on sentiment. So generally you're seeing a lot of mixed signals from these markets. Oil ever so slightly off, $57 a barrel for WTI, Brent at 43.03, gold absolutely steady, not far off $1,800 an ounce, 17.95 and near a 2011 high. Roger.
Right, let's go on to some of today's top stories now. Here in the UK, the Chancellor is going to give that major speech later, detailing plans to help the economy recover from the virus. Rishi Sunak will reveal a £2 billion scheme to tackle youth unemployment. The same amount's also going into making households more energy efficient. And also there's likely to be a stamp duty holiday for the property market.
And Boris Johnson is again warning the UK is ready to leave the EU without a trade deal if the bloc won't compromise. The Prime Minister made the comments in a call to German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Negotiations are still stuck over key questions, including how far Britain will be able to loosen its regulations and still enjoy single market access.
Some advisors to the President, Donald Trump, want the US to undermine Hong Kong's dollar peg. Sources tell Bloomberg the proposal hasn't gone to the President or his most senior advisors yet. It comes as the administration is considering how best to punish China for moves to chip away at Hong Kong's political freedoms.
And Deutsche Bank is paying New York's banking regulator $150 million. That's for a string of compliance lapses related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The regulator says the bank failed to detect or prevent millions of dollars of suspicious transactions. Deutsche Bank says it deeply regrets its association with Epstein and is cooperating with the authorities.
Now, Deutsche Post has issued its 2020 guidance earlier today alongside second quarter earnings that rose despite the pandemic. Analysts applauded the result and the unchanged dividend proposal, Nara.
Yeah, and earlier I and Manus Cranny spoke to Deutsche Post CEO Frank Appel on TV, who gave his perspective on the prospects for global growth and the possibility of a false recovery this year.
It's definitely possible that we will see a very strong recovery. We have seen already in the second quarter starting a recovery. It very much depends on how well the world contains the virus. At the moment, it looks in Europe pretty good, in Asia as well. Americas was behind the pandemic anyway, when they started later, and they are still more impacted still. So overall, I think we see clear signs that we can potentially get a fast recovery this year. But that's not given, and that's the reason why we plan with different scenarios. Even with the scenario that we get a very strong second wave in lockdowns, and the guidance is based exactly on these different scenarios.
When I first saw the release, I thought to myself, given all the conversations that we had earlier this year on first quarter earnings with various executives, there's so much uncertainty ahead. I understand that you've outlined 3 different scenarios through to 2022, but how useful will this guidance actually be to investors? Do you not think you're going to have to revise it every quarter?
I think none of us whenever through such a pandemic, and I think it's just prudent to assume different scenarios and tell the market, even in a worst case scenario, we are pretty confident that we can increase, due to the self-help measures, improve our performance year after year going forward. 4.7 would be still a record result for our performance year after year going forward. 4.7 would be still a record result for our company going forward. And I think I assume that investors will like that kind of visibility, saying, okay, if we get a fast recovery, they can deliver more. If we have a modest recovery, a U-shaped recovery, they still will deliver a very good result. And even in the worst case scenario, the company will go through that. And that's thanks to our great workforce we have around the world. That's the reason why we gave them all a bonus, an extraordinary bonus of €300 flat for everybody who works for our company, because they have done an outstanding job in the last month, and I trust them that they will continue to help the world to get back on track, because these people have worked relentlessly in this crisis. Of course, we have given them enough protection so that they stay healthy and safe, but they have done an outstanding job, and that's the base for us as well, that we look, even in a difficult scenario, with, I think, improving numbers forward.
That was Deutsche Post CEO Frank Appel joining myself and Manus Cranny on Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg TV earlier. And Deutsche Post shares are up 1.2% in today's session. Some analysts have applauded the earnings and dividend proposal. Roger.
Right, let's talk to Leanne Gerrans, who's got the latest global news. Leanne, good morning to you. And you begin with moves in the US to detach itself from the WHO.
Yes, indeed, Roger. Good morning. The White House is making good on its threats to leave the World Health Organization. The Trump administration has sent a letter to the agency giving it a one-year notice it plans to quit. President Donald Trump says the international body has been too deferential to China in its handling of the pandemic. The move comes as virus cases in the US near 3 million. Meanwhile, Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has arrived in the US for a meeting with President Trump. That's later. From Mexico City, Jose Orozco reports.
López Obrador, who had not left Mexico in 2 years, meets Trump at midday. Mexico's president said that he had tested negative for COVID-19 in advance of his trip. The occasion marks the dawn of a trade pact between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, which replaced the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. In Mexico City, Jose Orozco, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Civil rights advocates have criticized Facebook after a meeting with top executives, including CEO Mark Zuckerberg. The groups say the social network isn't taking demands to combat hate speech seriously. One said Facebook treated the hour-long video conference like a PR exercise. Facebook says it wants its platform to be hate-free, but knows it will be judged by its actions, not its words. And today is a deadline for nominations to be the next Director General of the World Trade Organization. Bloomberg's Bryce Bashik has those details.
In the coming months, trade officials will begin to winnow down the list of candidates and select one lucky finalist to lead the Geneva-based trade body out of the worst crisis in its 25-year existence. It's expected to be a hard-fought race, and the winner has the opportunity to reset an organization that struggled to adapt to the colossal economic and technological changes of the past quarter century. In Geneva, Bryce Bashik, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now with your morning sport, here's George Alderman with a win by Chelsea.
Chelsea are third in the Premier League this morning after holding off a Crystal Palace comeback to win 3-2 last night. Leicester have slipped to fourth, despite recovering from a goal down to draw 1-1 with Arsenal in North London. Manager Brendan Rodgers says he was impressed with how his side got back into the game. After losing 2-1 to Watford, Norwich will be relegated at the weekend if they don't beat fellow strugglers West Ham. David Moyes' side can move 7 points clear of the relegation zone with victory at home to Burnley this evening. Two teams with European ambitions meet as Sheffield United take on Wolves. Champions Liverpool are at Brighton after last year's title winners Manchester City face Newcastle. The summer of international cricket in England gets underway this morning with the start of the first test against the West Indies. Ben Stokes captains the national team for the first time, with regular skipper Joe Root missing the match to attend the birth of his child. All of the games are being held in biosecure venues to protect against COVID-19. Stokes knows they have a huge responsibility.
And that was George Alderman with the latest sport. Now, coming up on Daybreak Europe, we're going to be exploring which way markets are going at the moment. It's been a pretty mixed morning. We'll be talking to Kevin Bosher, Chief Investment Officer at Ravenscroft.
Yeah, looking at European equities, Roger, 40 minutes into the open, we're down 0.25 percentage point on the Stock 600, so risk off, but more muted than yesterday. In terms of US futures, they were struggling for direction in the Asian session, looking a little bit more positive now. This is Bloomberg.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Colbert, filling in for Smokey because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Are you looking for senior care for your mom or dad but don't know where to start? Hi, I'm Joan London with A Place for Mom. Nobody knows your parent or loved one better than you, and nobody knows senior living better than the experts at A Place for Mom. It's a free service, and we've helped thousands of families find the right place for their mom or dad. There's a place for answers, A Place for Mom. Call today.
Call A Place for Mom at 1-800-391-1755. That's 1-800-391-1755.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
For the Jewish...
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
At Halfords, we're here to get you where you want to be. We fit car tyres for over 500,000 customers every year. We could fit yours at one of over 350 garages, or even on your driveway with our mobile experts, which means you can safely hit the road again and surprise that special someone.
Happy birthday!
From tyre fittings to MOTs, there really is no job too big or too small. Halfords, for life's journeys.
In line with government guidelines, face coverings are now compulsory on public transport. At Asda, you can get a 4-pack of Prima disposable face coverings for £2.80, or a 2-pack of washable face coverings from £2.50. Asda, we're all in this together. Selected stores subject to availability.
I was offered one.
I was offered one. Were you?
Yeah, I was offered one too.
1 2 1 2. I was offered one.
I was offered one. Don't take our word for it. 9 out of 10 people said they were offered a great value deal with O2. Get yours today, in-store, online, or by phone.
I was offered one too. O2 Retail Exit Survey 309 of 348 agreed with the statement. O2 offered me a great value deal. For full verification, see o2.co.uk/terms.
If you want to find out what the best laptop is for all those video conferences with your colleagues while sitting at your makeshift desk, you could ask an algorithm. or someone called Al, or Sue, or Sanjay, or one of our other tech experts on Shop Live, Curry's PC World's online video call experience.
Hey, you're chatting to Colette here on Shop Live.
Isn't it nice to get advice from another human being? They're just a click away. Curry's PC World. Talk to our tech experts online with Shop Live.
Get ready for the University of Bedfordshire. We've got all you need to make ambition become reality, to make lifelong friendships, to make contacts in your chosen industry, to make a name for yourself, to make it. In fact, we've got everything except your application. So get it in, sit back and relax. Wait, actually, check out our generous scholarships and bursaries for support at every step at beds.ac.uk. Okay, now you can relax.
How do we control coronavirus now? Listen to Steph. She's a bus driver.
Now that people are using public transport again, we really need to make sure that we keep each other safe. Passengers need to stay 2 metres apart. If that's not possible, make it at least 1 metre. I want to see everyone wearing face coverings over their mouth and nose unless you've got a good reason not to. And when you get to where you're going, you need to wash your hands. We've still got to play our part.
Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
It could be a family syndicate. It could be down to not stepping on the cracks in the pavement. It could be someone whose birthday is their lucky numbers. It could be you. Don't miss tonight's Lotto double rollover. Play online or on the app. Lotto from the National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen. Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
To help keep you and your loved ones safe, TuneIn has the latest guidelines from the CDC. Home alone or with housemates, stay home as much as possible. Try to allow only people you live with into your home. Wash your hands. If you're sick, stay home and isolate from housemates. For the latest stories and updates on COVID-19, search Coronavirus News on TuneIn.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning, I'm Roger Hearing of this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. 45 minutes into the European opening. We're definitely seeing red on the screen. Stock 600 down 1/4%. FTSE 100 down just over 1/10%. CAC down 0.4%. The DAX down 0.2%. And the IBEX down just over 1%. In terms of the US futures, though, in fact, they're now in the green. They weren't earlier. S&P 500 up just over 0.3%. Dow the same. And NASDAQ the same now, too. So perhaps a little bit more of the optimism we saw in some parts of Asia, Chinese stocks spreading in that direction. In terms of bonds, the US 10-year Treasury benchmark 65 basis points. That's 1 basis point up on what we saw before. Also seeing a bit more strength. We're seeing weakness now in bunds. That's down 1 basis point, negative 0.44, and in gilts it's on it's a 16 basis point handle. That's also down 1 basis point. The dollar weaker now on Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, 1/10%. In terms of cable, the pound slightly stronger, almost 1/10%, 1.2551. Oil is on $40.56 the barrel. That's weaker, 1/10%. Brent also down about the same at $43.03 the barrel. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world. Leanne.
Roger, thank you. Boris Johnson is again warning the UK is ready to leave the EU without a trade deal if the bloc won't compromise. He made the comments in a call to German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Negotiations are still stuck over key questions, including how far Britain will be able to loosen its regulations and still enjoy the single market access. Now, the World Health Organization has acknowledged evidence that coronavirus can be spread by tiny particles suspended in the air. An official says airborne transmission cannot be ruled out in crowded, closed or poorly ventilated settings. If the evidence is confirmed, it may affect guidelines for indoor spaces. And it's bad news for American teens. President Donald Trump says the U.S. is considering banning video app TikTok. It is one way the White House is looking to retaliate against China over its handling of the coronavirus. No specific details on a potential ban as of yet, but according to a children's privacy advocate, the app is also facing a probe in the U.S. over its data collection practices. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Thank goodness is what I say. No, I'm only saying that because I've never really come to understand exactly what TikTok is and what the point of it is.
Well, I'm a little bit like you, Naira. I try to stay away from it because I love it so much. I downloaded it and I spent days on it, and I just thought, Leanne, you can't get into this hole of watching cute cats do tricks and people doing really funky dances. But we might be slightly boring, Naira, as we're a little bit older, dare I say.
You are. You're old.
So you love TikTok, do you, Roger?
Well, I am forced to. I have at least one teenage child.
Have you made videos yourself?
Strangely, no. But I do appreciate them.
Of a time lapse of your beard growing.
Oh,
that'd be a really quick TikTok video.
No. The world is not ready for that.
Yes, Christmas has come early in the Hearing household. Santa's already out and about. Okay. Leanne
and his cat Percy.
Yeah. With the world
I've
news.
got more fur than him.
Leanne Gerrans with the World News. Thank you so much. Now joining us down the line, Kevin Bosher, Chief Investment Officer at Ravenscroft, joining us to talk about the markets. Kevin, great to have you with us on the show. Thank you so much for joining. We've been talking all morning about how some of the enthusiasm has come out of equities over the past couple of days after the big run-up we've had, particularly in tech stocks. You remain optimistic for the outlook, both for the economy, but also for risk assets. Why?
Morning. Yes, I do. And I think there's three key reasons for this. First and foremost is just the huge amount of policy stimulus that we've seen globally, both monetary and fiscal. And it really shouldn't be underestimated. That is a huge sort of amount in support of liquidity underneath the system, both in terms of supporting the economic recovery and also, therefore, continuing market recovery. Secondly, I think probably as economies emerge from lockdown, we're definitely seeing stronger economic data, which means that hopefully we're through the worst of the economic data. And, of course, markets are a forward-looking mechanism, and they're starting to look forward to the economic recovery in the second half of this year and into next year, which should be followed by an earnings recovery as well. So it's really a combination of the policy support, the fact that we are through the worst of the economic data, and as economies emerge from lockdown, we should start to see evidence of stronger data. And indeed, if you look at Asia, which of course is leading, that's very much the case. But even in Europe and the US, the data is generally surprising on the upside.
But, Kevin, I mean, there's an awful lot of unknowns out there, not least, of course, involving the virus and its potential return. If there were a major global second wave, we talked about the stimulus, would that stimulus just return in the same form? Would the central banks, would the governments have more in their armories to put out? How would it work?
Well, I certainly think they would do more if needed, both monetary and fiscal, with a real target to get unemployment down, make sure people are working, because, of course, consumption is such a big part of the economy in both the US and Europe, and particularly the UK. So I certainly think we'd see more stimulus if required, but I also think we'll see countries and governments manage the virus, a return of the virus, or even a second wave in a different way. I just think the combination of the fact that we know more about the virus and who is most likely to be seriously affected, the fact that healthcare systems are better equipped to deal with it, there is some immunity in the system, with the fact that there are some treatments available, governments understand the longer-term risks of shutdown, and of course there's tracking and tracing support mechanisms as well. So I just think we will see countries and governments deal with any return of the virus or increase or a second wave in a very different way, which means that we will not see full economic lockdown.
So, Kevin, how are you constructing the portfolio at the moment? What, on the risk side, what kind of equity and or credit exposure are you taking, and where's the protection?
So from an equity perspective, we're very keen on some of the structural long-term themes that we've been invested in for some time. So, for example, we think technology, healthcare stocks come through this crisis in a much stronger shape, largely because governments, companies, everybody's going to be spending more on technology to boost productivity and to work differently, and also on healthcare, of course, as with an aging demographic and everyone wanting to spend more on healthcare, particularly post-COVID-19. So those are themes that we've liked for some time. We like emerging markets, mainly due to the stronger growth outlook, together with the fact valuations look more reasonable. We think China comes out of this pretty strongly with some strong fiscal and monetary stimulus to come. And we also think the dollar is peaking on a long-term view, which is generally more helpful for emerging markets. So for all those reasons, we like emerging markets. We acknowledge there's definite value in UK assets. They're very cheap. UK economy is really struggling to come out of lockdown. It's slower than many others, and it's later. And of course, there's still Brexit. So the UK economy is struggling, which means that UK assets have lagged and are very cheap, as is sterling. So there's definitely long-term value there that we're interested in. So we'd like to be invested in equities and have some hedges in place in a kind of barbell strategy. And those hedges, if you think the problem is going to be weaker growth going forward, and certainly there are secular weak growth reasons as well, then we really longer dated government bonds would give you some protection from that, even though they're very unattractive from a yield valuation perspective. Certainly a bit more cash than normal, both in terms of protection, but also to take advantage of opportunities that may come up over the next few months. And also we like gold on a long-term basis, mainly because it's our expectation that the combination of extreme fiscal and monetary stimulus, together with a more challenging macro environment moving forward and some supply-side disruption, will likely lead to a period of rising inflation after we get through this short-term deflationary bust type of scenario. So we think gold will give us some protection against that long-term. So we like equities, we like particular themes, but we do want some hedges in place as well.
Where would you deploy your cash in the next few months, Kevin?
I think to be honest, we've got a bit more cash than normal. I think chances are we would deploy it in equities if we saw any setbacks. So whilst we're cautiously optimistic that equities can make further progress as the economic recovery ensues, we do acknowledge that there's plenty of short-term risks out there. Markets have come a long way very quickly. We need to see evidence of the stronger economic data and earnings data, and particularly what we're looking for in the earnings season is some clear guidance from management that there's a bit more clarity on the future and where they're headed. Plus, of course, we've got the US election in November. It's increasingly likely that Joe Biden will get elected there, and we've got potentially increased US-China tensions as well as Brexit. So there's plenty of reasons why markets will stay volatile. We could likely get pullbacks over the next few weeks and months, and that for us would be an opportunity to deploy our cash in some of the attractive themes and investments that I've talked about.
Kevin, a lot of people say don't fight the central banks. You want to be buying credit, particularly investment grade. Does that not interest you?
Yeah, we do. On the fixed income side, certainly we are interested in credit, definitely investment grade, even high yield, because, of course, for the first time in a long time, the Bank of Japan have been buying high yield credit for some time. But this time around, the Fed are doing likewise for the first time. Even the ECB are talking about buying falling angels as part of their collateral program as well. Okay. And no doubt other central banks will do the same. So I think definitely credit is, for our fixed income exposure, credit is something that we find attractive, both investment grade
Kevin.
and high yield.
Kevin,
for government bonds, that give you protection.
We'll have to leave it there, Kevin. Thanks so much. Kevin Boscher there, Chief Investment Officer at Ravenscroft, joining us here on Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.
The big Volkswagen event is now on. If you're after a new Volkswagen, we offer to pay your first 3 months finance payments and an additional £500 to £1,000 contribution to your deposit at 3.8% APR representative. Hello, sir. Do any take your fancy?
Well, yes, a new Golf or T-Cross. A Tiguan. No, Passat. Oh, I need to sit down.
Here, have a seat.
The big Volkswagen event. With every type of car on offer, you may have trouble choosing. With Solutions Personal Contract Plan until 12th of July excludes e-Golf at participating retailers only. Minimum 46 months to receive 3 months finance payments. Indemnities may be required. Volkswagen Finance. Contact your local retailer to book an appointment.
When your tenants have a blown fuse box and you've got a busy day ahead, superheroes crashing through the wall isn't going to help anyone. With Direct Line Landlord Emergency added to your policy, we're on it to send a rather super electrician in 4 hours before you've tucked into your lunch. We can also assemble plumbers, locksmiths, glaziers and drainage engineers. Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. We're on it. Direct Line. Residential properties. Optional add-on up to £1,500 per caller. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. Better Hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Wednesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
The idea is to really hold the economy in suspended animation until we get control of this virus.
We are very much in a picture of monetary dominance.
We will get slower growth. I mean, let's not get confused about that.
We are in a national crisis. I think it is for all parties to pull together.
The euro area is facing an economic contraction of a magnitude and speed that are unprecedented in peacetime.
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning. Welcome to Bloomberg Radio. I'm Anna Edwards, live from London.
And I'm Matt Miller from the Bloomberg Bureau in Berlin. I thank you for joining us as well on Daybreak Europe. You're very likely listening on London DAB, and if you are there's a lot going on today. It's a very UK-centric news day, although there is a lot going on in the EU as well as Angela Merkel picks up the revolving presidency in Brussels.
Yeah, absolutely. So she's there in Brussels making her first post-coronavirus visit outside of Germany, isn't she, Matt? Trying to sell and drum up support for her €750 billion recovery fund for Europe. That's certainly very much of interest. But we'll also keep an eye here in the UK on Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and what he's doing with regards to, in particular, young people in the job market. That seems to be the real focus of what he'll say later. So early afternoon UK time, we'll wait for the Chancellor to give this summer statement as we try and rebuild the UK economy after coronavirus. Let's check the markets then, Matt, because with all of that in mind, we're taking a little bit of a step backwards, but US futures do keep recovering sort of minute by minute here through the Asian and into the European session. So we're getting better if you're long of the markets for European stocks. So Stock 600 in Europe down by 0.3%. The FTSE 100 down by 0.2. The CAC 40 and the Xetra DAX also on the back foot a little. The US futures, as I say, though, do point to the upside, up by between 2 and 0.3% for US equity markets this hour. The oil price is weaker, down by 0.3% on the Brent price. The yield on the US 10-year, we've got money going. We've got the yields going higher, in fact, across the US curve. So it's an interesting day. We do see US futures for stocks pointing higher. So maybe that points to something a little more risk on as we get into the US session. And with that in mind, the dollar seems to be fairly flat as well this morning. So that's a bit of a wrap of where we are on the data front this morning, Matt.
All right. Well, we have a treat for you today. Stephen Major was with us on Bloomberg Television a little bit earlier, the head of fixed income research at HSBC, and he's agreed to stay over and talk to us a little bit here on Bloomberg Radio as well. So, Stephen, great to have you. We covered a lot of area on television earlier that I will tell our listeners they can get by going to Bloomberg.com and checking out the clips. But I wanted to talk to you about Milton Friedman. You mentioned him in your note, and you know, when I was a kid, he was kind of like an economic idol. But now I feel like standards could send me to HR for even discussing Milton Friedman. What about his theories is going to be proved wrong in the current central bank activity to bail out economies around the world?
Well, I must say I thought you were a lot younger, Matt, because most of the people who have been receiving a kind of money supply, Friedman type education would have been at school in the 70s and university in the 80s. So I'm surprised. The thing about Friedman's legacy is, I'm not going to say anything's wrong. I'm just going to say that I disagree with the application in the current situation. So the world was different before the gold standard, for example, and the world is different today with the presence of central banks in the bond market and with negative rates.
So we have fiat currencies today. That's completely different to the gold standard era. And the idea that money supply going up is automatically inflationary needs to be interrogated, because you can go back to the 1970s, which was a completely different global economy. And, of course, the shock we all know, with hindsight, was the oil price shock. And so there was a case of too much money chasing too few goods, which is the classic Friedman you're talking about. Today, we have a massive demand shock beyond anything we've seen in living memory. And money supply has gone up. But has anyone actually done the work to look at why money supply has gone up? Money supply has gone up because money has been flooding into the banks and money market accounts. That's savings. That's not to be confused with money floating around the streets, which you can pick up and spend. That's not the same thing. And we did a lot of work on this, and we look at the accounts, we follow the money. We've done a lot of work on QE over the last decade, and it's true the central bank's balance sheet is bigger. And the central bank's balance sheet is bigger because in the case of the US, they've bought bonds and they are financed with reserves. The reserves are in the banking system. That's the opposite accounting entry. So a bank, a typical bank, imagine an example of a bank. On the asset side, they have reserves, and on the liability side, they have deposits. Those deposits are your money and my money. Now, the point is, people are saving who are lucky enough still to be working, and those that are furloughed or receiving some kind of help from governments are not going to spend all their money in a hurry. They need every penny they've got. So in a world of risk aversion and record savings levels, I think that the U.S. Savings rate as a percentage of disposable income is north of 20%. It's back to Second World War levels.
But some people,
that's not inflationary.
Right. So I'm remembering my double entry bookkeeping training, Stephen, and trying to keep up with your thinking. But it doesn't mean necessarily that savings will stay that high. And so some people will argue that inflationary impulses will kick in as these economies recover. We're still very much in the crisis, aren't we? Even if we are taking baby steps out of it. So inflation might not be on everybody's lips right now, but can we say for sure that inflation is not coming down the track?
Well, the people that are saving have got disposable income and they can afford to, and they're not going to become particularly risk-seeking anytime soon. And there's a vast proportion of the population that is bearing the pain, and they're not going to become risk-seeking all of a sudden either. So the thing with the surge in the savings rate is it looks fairly sticky to me, and there's also a consideration that you can go back to your double entry bookkeeping. What if all this savings suddenly did get spent? Well, first of all, you ask where the money would go, maybe into consumption and boosting the economy. But how will the banks be financing how will the central banks be financing their asset purchases? Because the double entry bookkeeping will explain to you that the central banks have taken a loan from the banking system. The banking system has been happy to make that loan to the central bank because they've received the deposits. This is really important to understand, and it's not being discussed sufficiently. Right, the double entry bookkeeping argument says that that's a real problem for the banking system. The banks will be shedding other kinds of assets, for example, loans, mortgages, bond positions, that kind of thing. It doesn't bear thinking about. So this is something that economists don't tend to talk about, and it seems to me that mainstream thinking is one side of the balance sheet, one side of the double entry. The savings look to me to be pretty sticky, and they better be, because if they were to rush out very quickly, we've got another challenge. And this comes to the root of the issue here about the QE. How big can the QE get? Well, the answer is not much bigger.
I had to say, seeing savings rates this high, I feel like it's almost un-American, because typically U.S. citizens like to spend just a little bit more than they make at all times. On the other hand, I can't imagine. I can't imagine any inflation because I've gone to so many ECB meetings where, since the beginning of Draghi, where they've been doing everything they can to bring about inflation and literally nothing has worked the way they measure it. But Bloomberg Economics recently came out with an alternative CPI basket. And, it reminded me of the comment to, I think it was Bill Dudley, that you can't eat an iPad, right? There are other things that especially the lower income households need to spend more of their money on. And there you do see inflation. According to the Bloomberg Economics study with the alternative basket, especially lower income households were facing real inflation on things like groceries and housing costs that you had no choice but to buy. Yeah. What do you think about the way inflation's measured and this alternative inflation gauge?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting avenue to go down, because there's undoubtedly some inflation. So it depends on your basket of goods. Although I would say that it's ever thus, because my basket of goods has changed with my age. So without stating what my preferences are today, I can tell you that they're different to what they were when I was 25 years old. So
gloves.
We'd hope so.
So my consumption basket has changed. So I'm much more sensitive to PPE, and school fees. And when I was 25, let's imagine it was more to do with entertainment and other areas. So that's just one example. So to do a cross-section today and to say that some costs are rising and some wages are rising is fair enough, but it needs to be put in the context of what I just said. So the authorities choose the basket that they have for a reason, and it's very slow to change. So granted it might change, but let's just take it with a pinch of salt.
Stephen, thank you very much. I bought some very expensive tea yesterday and reflected on that and its impact on inflation. Stephen Major, HSBC Global Head of Fixed Income Research. Thank you very much.
Let's get it over to Caroline Hepker now with your other global news headlines. Caroline?
Good morning, Matt and Anna. Let's start here in the UK. The Chancellor will give a major speech later detailing plans to help the economy recover from coronavirus. Rishi Sunak will reveal a £2 billion scheme to tackle youth unemployment. The same amount is also going into making households more energy efficient, and there'll likely be a stamp duty holiday for the property market. Meanwhile, the White House has made good on its threats to leave the World Health Organization. The Trump administration has sent a letter to the agency giving it a one-year notice that it plans to quit. President Donald Trump says that the international body has been too deferential to China in its handling of the pandemic. The move comes as virus cases in the US get close to 3 million. The World Health Organization, meanwhile, will send a mission to China this weekend to begin preparations to study the origins of the coronavirus. The WHO's Director General, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, has more on the upcoming investigation.
All preparations have been finalized, and WHO experts will be traveling to China this weekend to prepare scientific plans with their Chinese counterparts for identifying the zoonotic sources of the disease. The mission objective is to advance the understanding of animal hosts for COVID-19 and ascertain how the disease jumped between animals and humans.
Finally, Brazil's president has tested positive for COVID-19, a disease that he spent months claiming poses little risk. Jair Bolsonaro has called the virus a little flu and railed against lockdown measures, despite more than 65,000 deaths in his country. He announced his positive test in a bizarre news conference before stepping back from reporters and removing his mask.
Who wants to see my face? I'm fine, calm, thank God, all in peace. Thanks to those who prayed for me, were supporting me. I'm fine, thank God. Those who criticised me, there's no problem. You can continue criticising.
Jair Bolsonaro there. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Caroline Hepker. This is Bloomberg Matt.
All right, thanks very much for that. Now, when we come back, we're going to check in with Bloomberg Opinion, definitely a segment. You know, we do it at 9:20 every day, talking to the folks over at Bloomberg Opinion, and it's a fantastic way to get caught up on the issues that are being debated these days. You can also check it out on your terminal by typing OPIN GO. This is Bloomberg.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, makes innovation happen. The university helped biomedical engineering professor Tara Alvarez launch a startup that may revolutionize vision therapy.
Our startup through NJIT is called Oculomotor Technology. We create virtual reality vision therapy in a head-mounted display. So it's gaming, and basically we're sugarcoating the therapy so that children and young adolescents don't even realize they're doing therapy. To accomplish this, we need biomedical engineers, which are here on NJIT campus, computer scientists, artists, people that are into story development, and then we're collaborating with a lot of the large pediatric medical centers. This idea of a startup culture is extremely important to not just NJIT and the National Science Foundation, but also to the U.S. as a societal whole.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home. While you stay inside, enjoy a curated collection of archived concerts and behind-the-scenes stories from BSO musicians. BSO Homeschool provides lessons for music lovers of all ages. New performances and messages from musicians are added regularly. Enjoy these selections and much more at bso.org/at-home.
Melissa from Michigan. I work an extra part-time job serving lunch at my child's school, but I still can't afford to put food on our table.
Daniel from California. Choosing whether to pay the rent or pay to fix the car to get to work doesn't leave us with much at all. Now we can't even pay for meals.
Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Taylor Riggs on Bloomberg Technology.
I want to stick with some of the big tech movers, and for that we go on over to Dan Ives, who is over at Wedbush, and he joins us now. Dan, talk to me about these record highs. Does anything about this market, the fact that it's led by so many companies that are getting bigger and bigger, and yet there are fewer and fewer of them, any of that make you nervous?
I mean, look, the strong are getting stronger, and you're seeing that with FANG names continue to outperform. And look, we think FANG names could be up another 20-25% over the next 6 to 9 months, with Apple our favorite. But I think what's starting to happen now across cloud, across cybersecurity, e-commerce, you're seeing just a lack of secular growth stories.
And you're seeing the rest of this rally through 2020? Or are you looking further out into 2021?
Yeah, I mean, we believe, especially going into next year, there's been a two-phase way that we've sort of, from a client perspective, to play this COVID-19 pandemic and the sell-off. It started in March, April, where you look at these rebound names that can navigate through the storm on cloud, and I think you saw a lot of these multiples re-rate.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from London. I'm Anne-Marie Horder with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. I want to start in Asia this morning. China and Hong Kong outperformed. They stayed positive. Both those sectors, CSI 300 closed up 1.6%. Hong Kong, 0.6%. Positive despite reports that some aides in the Trump administration are considering proposals to undermine the Hong Kong dollar's peg to the U.S. dollar. Traders dismissing the notion, but HSBC did slump in Asia trading, and this fresh geopolitical risk has put some pressure on European equities for a second day. All major indices in Europe are down in the red this morning. The CAC down nearly 0.6%, FTSE 100 down nearly 0.3%, the DAX down 0.3%. The Stock 600 is lower. The benchmark index, major sectors are in the red this morning, with banks leading the whole index lower, down 1.6% this morning. Risk sentiment overall, we are seeing a bit subdued. U.S. equity futures are up just a touch. 10-year Treasury yield is pretty steady, 6.5%. WTI crude trading below $41 a barrel this morning, down nearly 0.5%. That's a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. And here's Leanne Garens with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Leanne.
Well, good morning, Marie. It's Caroline this morning doing world and national news. So, in terms of what's happening, the World Health Organization has acknowledged evidence that coronavirus can be spread by tiny particles suspended in the air. An official says that airborne transmission cannot be ruled out in crowded, closed or poorly ventilated settings. If the evidence is confirmed, it may affect guidelines for indoor spaces. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is again warning that the UK is ready to leave the EU without a trade deal if the bloc won't compromise. He made the comments in a call with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Negotiations are still stuck over key questions, including how far Britain will be able to loosen its own regulations and still enjoy single market access. And finally, the Portuguese Prime Minister says that talks are underway with British officials about travel corridors between the two countries. Portugal was left off a list of destinations that people can go to without having to quarantine when they arrive back in England. Antonio Costa says that his foreign minister has had a long conversation with his UK counterpart. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Caroline Hepker. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
That music means it is 9:20 in the City of London. Time to check in with Bloomberg Opinion. We're joined today by opinion columnist and former Sunday Times editor Martin Ivans, who's writing about British soft power and the royal family's place in that conversation. Martin, great to speak to you. Really good to have you on the programme with us. Hope you will make many appearances. Let's delve into your piece then. You talk about how Prince William can save Britain and the royals. What is the gist of your argument?
Well, good morning, and it's good to be on the programme. All nations need a form of soft power. It makes them attractive to international investors. It makes them attractive particularly to the young when they're making decisions about where they want to go to university. And it makes it attractive as a place to do business. London and the UK have prospered very much in previous decades. We've always been rather fashionable ever since the 60s, when the Beatles were our most famous export. And nowadays, our most attractive export probably is the royals. Of all the other sort of celebrities and people who exemplify values that people actually rather admire, I think the royals come out best. But it's quite a narrow stage now, because many of the members of the royal family are getting older. Some of them are in semi-retirement, and some of them, for reasons that aren't so palatable, have withdrawn from the public eye.
Yes, indeed.
Martin, what I think is interesting is, from an American perspective or from even a German perspective, I've spent many years living in both countries. The sound of a British accent automatically makes the listener assume that you're wealthy and educated, right? Or that's how it was. Don't
say that, Matt. Martin and I have been trading off that for years, I'm sure. Well,
that's how it was, right. As you point out, pre-Brexit and pre-COVID. But that perception has changed after these two events, hasn't it?
Yeah, a little bit, because we're not seen quite as competent as we were, given the high casualty rates from COVID. Like Anna personally, I've done very well out of it. I lived in New York City, and everybody assumed I was a duke's son because of my English accent, and everybody was very nice to me, right across the United States, because they thought I had, I was well bred and had a lot of money behind me because of this voice. But it has changed a little bit. I think we've got to work that much harder. I think Germany, as you say, has done well.
You argue that there are two royals in particular that can really carry the soft power through, I suppose. I know Kate Middleton, which is interesting. I don't, either in that identity or in her current one. But what is it that William and Kate can do that the other royals can't, Martin?
I think personally, it's sort of integrity, and it's a recognition that they do work hard. I mean, they are young and attractive too. I think there's always been a sort of doubt about some members of the royal family. Do they blow their own trumpet too much? Is it about them? Are they too entitled? I don't claim to be sort of best friends of either Duke or the Duchess, but I have met them on a number of occasions. and they really do give off a sense of duty to what they, to their role. They do work hard. Sometimes the royals are criticised for having an easy life, but take Kate. She's had 3 children in quick succession, and she's very sort of brave about going out there. She keeps interested in looking after her kids. She doesn't just devolve them on other people, but yet she does put herself at the service of her country, and it's tough, because that sort of scrutiny is wearing after a while. And to have photographers always intruding on your life, to have people like ourselves sort of watching for their every move or every flaw.
And can I ask you? Yeah, and can I ask you, Martin, just because we all work in journalism, but you've worked in the UK press, not in a tabloid capacity, but you've worked in the UK press, which is something that Matt and I have not done. I mean, the fascination, the love-hate relationship. We hear a lot about that. Do you think there can be, if Kate and William carry this on for the next, for years and years to come, can there be a better relationship between the two? Because it does seem to be toxic sometimes.
Yes, I mean, I think we saw it go toxic with Harry and Meghan, and in a way I thought it was very sad, because although they're criticised for being woke sometimes, I think it's quite important that they appeal to a youthful demographic that actually shares many of their concerns, and they reflected that. In the case of William and Kate, I think they have been very tolerant. They've tried to work out a good modus vivendi with the press, both popular and broadsheet. And so far, I think they've managed it very well. I think the hardest bit comes to pictures, in fact, because that's a sense where the press begins to intrude on private life. And again, I think sort of Kate's been very brave so far in allowing a certain amount of access to her children. But it's getting that balance right, I think, is always going to be tense. And these problems go back, and William will remember the treatment of his mother and the sort of the press, as he would see it, hounding of her. But he is a grown up. He has a very sensible view of how to deal with this. So I think at the moment he's managing it very well.
Well, it does seem as if, and it always has seemed as if, Prince William takes his duty to the nation very seriously. You didn't get that feeling from Harry and Meghan, so I can imagine that, Britons who were concerned about the royal family serving England aren't terribly disappointed that they've split. I mean that they've left. That's a colloquial term for leaving, not that they've split up. I wonder, you make an interesting argument that the brand has suffered. Even France has more soft power in a league table of world soft powers, and the brand has dropped below now China and Japan to take 4th place, with the U.S. having the strongest brand. Boris Johnson can't really boost it because
the big Volkswagen event is now on. If you're after a new Volkswagen, we offer to pay your first 3 months finance payments and an additional £500 to £1,000 contribution to your deposit at 3.8% APR representative. Hello, sir. Do any take your fancy?
Well, yes, a new Golf or T-Cross. A Tiguan. No, Passat. Oh, I need to sit down.
Here, have a seat.
The big Volkswagen event. With every type of car on offer, you may have trouble choosing. With Solutions Personal Contract Plan until 12th of July, excludes e-Golf at participating retailers only. Minimum 46 months to receive 3 months finance payments. Indemnities may be required. Volkswagen Finance. Contact your local retailer to book an appointment.
Here's to you that learned with homeschooling that your kids are smarter than you. Here's to all the self-taught banana-bread bakers. And to you that rocked that very questionable homemade haircut. Costa is giving £3 to everyone that missed us as much as we missed you. Get your £3 in the Costa app today and enjoy a coffee, cake, or snack on us. Come on, you earned it. Terms and conditions apply. For details, visit costa.co.uk/terms.
At Halfords, we're here to get you where you want to be. Why not get road ready with a free car check worth £15 at all our stores and garages? With 25,000 weekly slots available at 700 locations, you can count on us to get you safely back on the road. Or even back beside the seaside. From MOTs to tyre fittings, there's no job too big or too small. Halfords, for life's journeys.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
Part of the union. I mean, it's true of the BBC to a degree as well. But there's a sort of a famous incident here when David Cameron, in a documentary, said that his private secretary had approached the Queen to see if she could, if not sort of directly intervene, but just make raise what he called an eyebrow at the prospect of Scotland leaving the Union. And I think it's interesting in the last year that William and Kate have shown more interest in their role in Scotland. William has taken up a position in the Scottish Church, the Kirk, and you've seen just before the lockdown, you saw Kate travelling a number of times north of the border. And I think they are a critical symbol.
We will watch that with interest. Thanks so much. Bloomberg opinion columnist and formerly of the Sunday Times, of course, Martin Ivans.
Fantastic conversation. And I know your theory, Anna, on what the new model could be.
I just think that there could be other models available. Maybe they're already thinking of them.
I think it's fascinating, but we'll save that for another time right now. Great to have that discussion with Martin there. Fantastic to get his time. Let's take a look. Were you going to say the data?
You go for it.
At the data?
Yes.
I was going to say the same thing. Let's take a look at what's going on in markets right now. To be fair, they had leveled off somewhat during our conversation with Martin. We saw the FTSE and the CAC, as well as the DAX, go back to very little change. They're slumping again a little bit, but not too much. So the FTSE, it's only down 9 points right now to 6180. The CAC 40 is the biggest loser of the three major European indexes, down 0.5% to 5016. And the DAX is down about 0.25% right now, or 35 points to 12,582. If you're preparing for the open on Wall Street, you're now looking at green arrows, whereas an hour ago, futures were still down. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ, mini contracts, mini futures are all on the rise, and NASDAQ futures are the biggest winners, up about 0.25%. If you look at other risk indicators to help you gauge this morning's open, you'll see that investors are letting go of 10-year treasuries, the yield floating higher to 0.6463. The yen is unchanged against the dollar, though nowadays with the dollar and the yen both thought of kind of as safe havens, it's kind of difficult to gauge what kind of a risk signal that is. The Bloomberg Dollar Index, by the way, is also very little changed at 1213. The pound is coming down, but from a fairly high level, 125.35, and the euro is rising to 112.86 right now. Gold also rising, almost back to 1,800 right now, $1,798.96 a troy ounce for gold. Oil also gaining just slightly today. Actually, I just saw Brent crude turn back down, so it's off a penny to 43.07. NYMEX WTI is down 8 cents to $40.54. And there is a Bloomberg data check.
This is the Brussels edition, Bloomberg's briefing on what matters most in the European Union this week.
Welcome to another edition of the Brussels edition. We are joined by our reporter on the ground there for us, Maria Tadeo. And this week we're looking at French politics after President Emmanuel Macron completed a government reshuffle hoping to inject new momentum into his administration.
Exactly, Matt. And by the way, if you hear any noise, it's because I'm outside of the European Parliament waiting for Angela Merkel. But going back to the point here is, yes, like Emmanuel Macron has completely changed his cabinet. He's hoping to bring in new energy. Of course, this is the team that should help him get reelected in 2022. At least that is a goal. But it's interesting when you look at the names here that he does seem to think what France needs is more of Macron, because the new people, well, they're not that well known, and it's been just, switching names from one ministry to another one.
Yeah, very interesting as well. Also interesting when you look at some of the names on his economic team, mostly poached from the center-right, doesn't change in this reshuffle. So Bruno Le Maire stays finance minister, the man who pushed for reforms and defended the very unpopular pension reform. He stays put, meaning perhaps that on the economic front, we're not actually going to see a lot of changes.
Yes, and that's, to me, is one of the things that is, it's actually pretty interesting about Emmanuel Macron, because he says on the surface, I want to make this a much more social government, I want to make this more environmentally friendly, but ultimately when you look at the economic policy of it, Bruno Le Maire is still on. Everyone that works around Bruno Le Maire is still keeping that job, and we know he has been at times confrontational when you look at tariffs, when you look at new taxes, which, by the way, they have ruled out, but it's a question mark as to whether or not Macron is going to be able to keep that promise. And the fact that we could also get, this digital tax, which has infuriated the United States, and Bruno Le Maire is very much at the forefront of that.
Yeah, it's been an interesting shuffle. Also, the changing out the prime minister was interesting because Macron was in some ways taking out a rival, right? He was under threat from Philippe Edouard as the latter had become, more popular in polls than Macron himself was. How does the replacement look, Maria? The new prime minister that's been put in place to replace Edouard Philippe?
Yes, and actually it's interesting now that you mentioned this, because with the corona crisis, you did see that Macron's popularity, and actually it's interesting now that you mentioned this, because with the corona crisis, you did see that Macron's popularity, which has been in free fall now for months, took a hit, and Edouard Philippe did much better than expected. And it's funny because a lot of the French officials that I speak to here in Brussels, they say it's because he was very clear in given directions. When you listen to Emmanuel Macron, sometimes he gives speeches that are too long, they use very complicated language, and by the end of it, no one has any clue what he said. Whereas his prime minister actually was very much to the point, very simple directions, and when he didn't know the answer to a question, he would say it. So yes, he has removed what could be a competitor and put in place Jean Castex, who a lot of people have never heard of, and this is someone who will openly tell you, I'm not seeking the limelight, I just want to serve the president.
All right, so interesting stuff. Let's bring in Bruno Koch. He's an analyst and a researcher at the Center for Political Research at Sciences Po. And Maria, why don't you start it off with Bruno, as you've been in contact with him. You've gotten this expert for us to discuss.
For sure. Well, Bruno, thank you so much for joining us from Paris. The obvious question that I wanted to ask you is, when you look at the reshuffle that's happened, what has actually changed? Because on the surface, it seems not a lot.
It was actually there before with Edouard Philippe, the former prime minister. So there is not that much change. The major change concerns personalities that are coming to the government. Few new personalities came in, and Emmanuel Macron tried to convince people from the center left to join the government, and actually it was a fail. So the political center of gravity of the government is still the same. It's center and center right, and it's going to be more and more difficult for Emmanuel Macron to explain to France that it is left and right at the same time. It's more and more center right.
This reshuffle basically takes out the threat of Philippe to Macron's popularity, but it was also designed to build the popularity of the president and what he's doing now. Is it going to be successful in convincing more French people that they're doing the right thing?
You need much more, obviously, to convince the people to give back popularity to Emmanuel Macron. The rating of Emmanuel Macron before the COVID was about 30, 35. Now, these days, it's about 40. It's not so much, particularly if you're comparing popularity of Macron to popularity of the other European executives. You could see that Macron did not benefit so much from the management of the COVID crisis. The public opinion in France evaluated very negatively what the government has done, despite the government has done so many things, particularly economic support to the companies and economic support to the population. But the evaluation is mostly negative. And to make it positive, a reshuffle of governance obviously is not going to make it in itself. To regain popularity for Macron would mean first to show the French that the economic and social consequences of the COVID crisis are going to be handled. The expectation is that we could get plus 1 million of jobless people in the coming months in France. The fiscal and budget issues are going to be also quite significant for France, and it's all of that which is waiting for Macron.
And Bruno, now that you mention the French public opinion and the fact that Emmanuel Macron has been trying to please them for so long, but it doesn't seem to resonate, I do wonder, isn't it just the normal voter behavior, though, in France? Once you get elected president, there's nothing you can do. It doesn't mean anything in terms of your re-election. They just don't like you as soon as you get into office.
It's true that it's third French president that we see in the same situation. Nicolas Sarkozy in 2007 became his presidential mandate with a very big popularity, and it was the feeling that we've got a new young president with Sarkozy. Then we've got François Hollande, a totally different style, but again, quite rapidly unpopular. And it looks that Macron is also in this kind of presidential malediction in France, which is that you become quite rapidly unpopular. The problem of Emmanuel Macron is a little bit more specific. It's the image of Macron in the population, which looks to be like fixed, that nothing has changed. We've got the big national debate after the yellow vest crisis. Then nothing has changed. Despite Emmanuel Macron was on the front, despite Emmanuel Macron was leading an amazing democratic experiment with the big national debate we've got after the yellow vest crisis, but nothing has changed. Macron did a lot during the COVID crisis also, but nothing has really changed. And so Macron has a problem of image with part of the population, quasi since the beginning. He doesn't look empathetic to the population. He looks arrogant for some of them, and these kind of images are very, very difficult to modify.
One of the issues I think you have written in the past, Bruno, is that the voters just don't really buy it from Emmanuel Macron. He recently took a trip to the French Alps. Our Bloomberg reporter Anya Nussbaum wrote a story, and he was looking at the glacier on Mont Blanc, and he said, such rapid melting, it's dizzying, which is almost comical, but it also...
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Wednesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
At Halfords, we're here to get you where you want to be. Why not get road ready with a free car check worth £15 at all our stores and garages? With 25,000 weekly slots available at 700 locations, you can count on us to get you safely back on the road. Or even back beside the seaside. From MOTs to tyre fittings, there's no job too big or too small. Halfords, for life's journeys.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
Listen, that's a dream. Everyone has them, jingling away in the back of our minds. And most of the time, that's where dreams stay. So easy to ignore. Anything can drown them out, and everything does. But at Honda, we listen to our dreams. We get right up close. And on really good days, they become reality. From 2022, Honda's mainstream cars will only be hybrid or electric. Honda, the power of dreams.
And action!
I was offered one.
Cut. That's not on the script.
I was offered one. Get in.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was offered one.
Come, boy. I was offered one.
Don't take our word for it. 9 out of 10 people said they were offered a great value deal with O2. Get yours today, in-store, online, or by phone.
I was offered one too. O2 Retail Exit Survey 309 of 348 agreed with the statement. O2 offered me a great value deal. For full verification, see o2.co.uk/terms.
Like right now? Get your cook on later with Asda. Get 3 for £3 on snacks like a 5-pack of Cathedral City nibbles and Dairyly Lunchables. Peckish anyone? Asda. Save money, live better. Selected stores and lines subject to availability. Lunchables 63 grams to 83.4 grams. Prices £1.50 to £1.55. Offers end 22nd of July.
What have you missed the most? A haircut? A visit to the shops?
Oh, you look lovely in that.
What about a nice lunch?
Fish and chips, please.
Salt and vinegar with that.
Or an afternoon in a pub garden? Fancy a casual bike ride? Or perhaps something a little more intense? Or maybe you want a relaxing day out. Whatever you've missed, get out there and enjoy it again safely. Find out how at gov.uk/enjoy summer safely.
4 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from London. I'm Anne-Marie Horder with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. We are seeing risk sentiment overall subdued this morning. European equities, the Stoxx 600 is flat, but a little bit to the red. So that would be a second day of European equities falling. But we have a mixed picture with the FTSE 100 up, the CAC 40 as well down. The biggest laggard across the space, though, are the banks this morning, down more than 1% on that sector. In China, though, and in Hong Kong, we did have stocks outperform. The CSI 300 closing up more than 1.5%, stayed positive even despite these reports overnight that some aides in the Trump administration are considering proposals to undermine the Hong Kong dollar peg to the U.S. dollar. So that's fresh geopolitical risk, even though traders are dismissing that motion. In New York, U.S. equity futures are a touch higher. 10-year Treasury yield steady, 0.65%. Crude this morning, WTI trading just under $41 a barrel. Industry report yesterday signaling surprise gain in U.S. stockpiles. And gold this morning trading near its highest level since 2011. We are just under $1,800 a ton. Now it's a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Here's Caroline Hepker for more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Caroline.
World Health Organization has acknowledged evidence that coronavirus can spread by tiny particles suspended in the air. An official says that airborne transmission cannot be ruled out in crowded, closed or poorly ventilated settings. If the evidence is confirmed, it may affect guidelines for indoor spaces. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson is again warning that the UK is ready to leave the EU without a trade deal if the bloc won't compromise. He made the comments in a call to the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Negotiations are still stuck over key questions, including how far Britain will be able to loosen its regulations and still enjoy single market access. Meanwhile, the Portuguese Prime Minister says that talks are underway with British officials about how travel corridors between the two countries could work. Portugal was left off a list of destinations that people can go to without having to quarantine when they arrive back into England. Antonio Costa says that his foreign minister has had a long conversation with his UK counterpart. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Caroline Hepker. This is Bloomberg. Matt, to you.
Caroline, thank you so much for that. Now, let's get over to Nathan Hager. He's prepping for Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning.
Nathan, what have you got ahead?
Well, we're tracking the spread of the coronavirus in this country. The U.S. is edging close to 3 million total infections since the pandemic began, and the surge that we've been following in the South for weeks now has the infection since the pandemic began, and the surge that we've been following in the South for weeks now has the federal government planning to ramp up testing in a number of key hotspots. That's as the Trump administration gives the UN formal notice that it is quitting the World Health Organization next year in response to the pandemic. We're going to get the latest on the outbreak and what it's going to take to flatten the persistently steepening curve in this country. Professor Andy Pekosh of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health joins us for his weekly visit. We're also going to have details on a reported White House plan, a pretty important Bloomberg News scoop this morning of a White House plan to undermine the Hong Kong dollar to get back at China for its new national security law. James Bevan, Chief Investment Officer at CCLA, is going to join me and Karen Moscow on that and much more coming up this morning on Bloomberg Daybreak. Hope you'll join us for it. Matt?
Yeah, actually, that's the most read story. You just mentioned the Hong Kong dollar peg story.
Yeah.
If you type, as you know, READ on the Bloomberg terminal, you see the most read stories. Default is over the last 8 hours. But when I looked, about 8 hours ago when I woke up, I saw it in that position as well. So it's interesting, I think, Nathan, because traders have told us, and we've even written a story about that separately, that the idea is wacky and traders doubt Trump really is going to end the Hong Kong peg, dollar peg. But even the possibility of his aides discussing this instantly becomes one of the most read stories because for so long, so many different people have tried and failed to bet on that break.
Yeah, the ongoing tensions between the U.S. and China have been a story for markets for so long. It's going to be very interesting to get James's take on it this morning.
Looking very much forward to that. Nathan, thanks so much. Nathan Hager coming up next with Karen Moscow. If you're listening on Sirius XM channel 119, if you're listening on London DAB digital radio, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance.
Matt, let's pick up where you were just leaving things there in terms of the Hong Kong story. We're joined now by Rupert Harrison, Portfolio Manager and Head of Research at BlackRock Multi-Asset Strategies. He was also formerly Chief of Staff to Chancellor in the UK, George Osborne, and Chair of the UK Treasury's Council of Economic Advisors. And we definitely want to get his thoughts on the UK, given Rishi Sunak's going to speak. But just because you were talking there, Matt, about what was going on in Hong Kong, I just wonder, Rupert, good morning to you, if you have thoughts on the idea that the Trump administration might throw around the possibility of undermining the Hong Kong dollar peg, because a lot of people have been pointing out this morning it seems unlikely because this would be something that would then backfire on global financial stability and therefore on the US. Well, what would your sort of overall thoughts be?
Yeah, look, I agree with that. I don't think this is something they're going to do anytime soon. It would have very serious consequences for a number of international banks, and that would have pretty severe blowback into the US financial system and the US economy. But I think longer term, this is the kind of measure that we could see enacted. I think we are heading into a period of, heightened economic tensions between the US and China, and essentially full spectrum, economic warfare in a sense, if you like. This is not just coming from the White House. This is coming from both sides of Congress. It's very hard to see how this doesn't escalate further. And I think, in a sense, this is a warning to U.S. banks, international banks, that the U.S. wants to see them, insulate themselves from China. We've already had pressure on pension schemes not to invest in Chinese assets. Yeah, I think this is only going to get more and more intense as time goes on.
Yeah, I think, the story, Rupert, that the U.S. wants to punish HSBC for supporting the national security law in China makes a lot more sense and is more likely. To me, this story on the Hong Kong dollar peg somehow being broken, it's kind of like reading a story about winning the lottery, because I think investors somehow see, the golden ticket as breaking the Hong Kong dollar peg is like, when Soros broke the Bank of England. Like, that's when some crazy punter is going to make $1 billion. But it just seems like it would be so difficult, given the amount of dollars Hong Kong has in reserve, given the amount of treasuries China holds, and given the fact that it really wouldn't benefit the U.S. anyway.
No, look, I agree, and it's not something that I think anyone would be wise to bet on anytime soon. And indeed, even if you did, it's not clear that you would be able to make a huge amount of money out of this, given the constraints that the Chinese system could put on the various ways of trying to structure that trade. But I think that this is something we have to take seriously longer term. I think that the US is willing to impose significant pain on China and on the global trading and financial system over time. And I think that, yes, this is in a sense an attempt to heighten those tensions, to force the international system to reduce its exposure to Hong Kong and China. But yeah, I agree. This is not something that should be recommended anytime soon as a kind of break the buck trade.
Yeah, the idea that financial institutions may have to pick sides in this is an interesting one. Rupert, let's move a little closer to where I am. I'm sitting here in London waiting for the Chancellor Rishi Sunak to speak a little bit later on. Are we in danger of being, as market participants, in danger of being underwhelmed a little bit by what is announced later? This is not necessarily going to be like the German fiscal stimulus with a big, multi-billion pound investment into green technology or green parts of the economy, for example. What do you expect?
Well, I do think it will be significant, but you're right that it's only the next stage of the UK stimulus plan. I don't think it will be the last word on it. I expect we'll get more in the autumn. In a sense, the biggest thing that the UK has done by far has been the furlough scheme, that supports people in jobs. That is very, very large, and it is also a very large stimulus for the economy. And what we're seeing today, in a sense, is how is the UK Treasury going to taper off that scheme while maintaining overall level of fiscal support for the economy and for job creation. So we've seen already, some of the news coming out in terms of support for insulation schemes, support for job creation schemes. Probably, I think we'll get a VAT cut on the hospitality and leisure sector, which will be pretty significant. That could cost 5 to 10 billion. Sterling, and we'll probably get stamp duty holidays for the lower end of the housing market.
VAT on hospitality has Matt's vote.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I think they'll definitely do that. I mean, I think that there would be a case for a broader VAT cut. I think that at the moment, probably the balance of risks would suggest erring on the side of doing too much rather than too little. But as I say, I don't think this is the last word from the UK. On the infrastructure side, green investment side that you mentioned, the UK already has some pretty ambitious plans to ramp up government capital spending. The constraint there is not so much money, it is really capacity. And so really, they are trying to ramp that up as fast as possible already.
I don't think many Americans understand how seriously despised the stamp duty is, which is an extra tax that you have to pay on top of, I think, tax when you buy a house or sell a house. So it'll be interesting to see if they do get rid of that. And then if prices just fall another 70 or 80%, I could afford a flat, two-bedroom flat in Chelsea. Rupert, thanks so much for joining us. Rupert Harrison, portfolio manager and head of research at BlackRock Multi-Asset Strategies. This is Bloomberg.
Car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel-good car buying, all in one place.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Wednesday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Here's to you that learned with homeschooling that your kids are smarter than you. Here's to all the self-taught banana bread bakers. And to you that rock that very questionable homemade haircut. Costa is giving £3 to everyone that missed us as much as we missed you. Get your £3 in the Costa app today and enjoy a coffee, cake, or snack on us. Go on, you earned it. Terms and conditions apply. For details, visit costa.co.uk/terms.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Wednesday, July 8th, 2020. Coming up this hour.
As coronavirus infections surge, the government ramps up testing across the South.
The Trump administration gives notice to the UN saying it's quitting the World Health Organization.
And the White House takes aim at Hong Kong with a push to undermine the city's currency.
Long Island begins phase 4 of reopening today, plus President Trump pushes for schools to reopen in the fall. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. The Ryder Cup has been postponed, and another net won't be part of the NBA restart.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by SEI. Imagine your asset management firm's operational infrastructure as a competitive advantage. Let SEI show you how at SEIC.com/IMS.
And U.S. futures are higher this morning. It is 5:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are up about 7 points. Dow futures up 35. NASDAQ futures up 34. The DAX in Germany is little change this morning. So is the FTSE 100. The CAC in Paris is down 0.5%. 10-year Treasury down 2/30 seconds. Yield 0.64%. The yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.1% or 4 cents at $40.58 a barrel. And COMEX gold is up 0.1% or $2 at $18.11.90 an ounce. Nathan.
Karen, we're seeing daily coronavirus infections across the country slow a bit. Yesterday saw cases rise by the same rate as last week, though increases in the South remain stronger. Dan Gelber is mayor of Miami Beach.
This is real, and I think everybody needs to understand that, because if they did, they would know what to do. They would wear masks. They would socially distance themselves. They would take precautions that every doctor I know tells them they should take.
Florida's positive test rate jumped above 16%. That's the highest level on record. In Texas, new cases hit 10,000 for the first time, and Arizona recorded the most deaths since the outbreak began. That has Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego worried about hospital capacity.
We are worried that the system that is already in crisis will only get more crowded.
For the fourth straight day, new infections in the U.S. topped 50,000. That has the federal government ramping up testing in Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. Officials will open 8 new testing sites to get a firmer grasp on how the pandemic is evolving.
Officials at the White House are speaking out on the pandemic. Members of the Trump administration talked to Bloomberg Radio about the outbreak, including response coordinator Deborah Burke. She's praising governors who mandate masks in their states.
I want to really applaud the governors who've taken decisive action to really mandate masks, increase social distancing, close bars.
The praise from Dr. Birx comes despite President Trump's resistance to masks. She says action on the local level has the power to change the course of the pandemic.
At the same time, the outbreak has exposed U.S. reliance on overseas drug manufacturing. Health Secretary Alex Azar tells us the president is considering decisive action to change that.
So
it might mean that we have to use our powers under the Defense Production Act or otherwise to fund and incentivize domestic manufacturing.
The U.S. drug industry is largely dependent on overseas manufacturers, especially China. Under the Defense Production Act, the president could order businesses to prioritize federal needs.
When it comes to the outbreak in the South, the chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence is ruling out another lockdown.
We can make sure that America stays open and stays healthy. And I think that one of the things we've learned through this is there's also an enormous health consequence to shutting down the economy, whether or not that's a financial pain or whether or not that's a psychological pain.
Mark Short tells us the White House wants another stimulus package by early August, but it also wants to keep the cost below $1 trillion.
I think we want to make sure that that people that are still unemployed and hurting are protected, but at the same time, we want to take into consideration the fact the economy is bouncing back and want to try to contain the amount of spending.
The White House wants the package to include a payroll tax cut, tax incentives for business, and a one-time bonus for Americans returning to work.
Meantime, the administration's frustration with the World Health Organization and its handling of the virus is coming to a head. Bloomberg's John Tucker joins us live with the very latest. Good morning, John.
And Nathan, with total infections in the U.S. approaching 3 million, the White House says it's withdrawing from the WHO. It delivered a required one-year notice to the United Nations General's Secretary General. President Trump has said the WHO has a pro-China bias. The withdrawal notice was met with criticism by Lamar Alexander, Republican chairman of the Senate Health Committee. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, John, thank you. The White House is also taking aim at Hong Kong to punish China for its new national security law in the city. Sources tell us advisors want to undermine the Hong Kong dollar's peg to the U.S. dollar. We get more from Bloomberg national security reporter Bill Ferries.
There are some senior officials on Mike Pompeo's Secretary of State staff who are putting forward a range of options that would be pretty disruptive and pretty extreme by historical accounts. Now, it's still a question about whether this will get to the president's desk or whether Pompeo will accept them and end up in some sort of a debate with other cabinet members about whether to go through with them.
And the main proposal being considered would limit the ability of banks in Hong Kong to buy U.S. dollars. However, some in the administration worry that would only hurt Hong Kong banks in the U.S., not China.
And on the corporate front, Facebook has wrapped up its meeting with civil rights organizations. It did not go well. Here with details is Ed Baxter from our Bloomberg 960 newsroom in San Francisco.
The coalition of NAACP, Color of Change, and the Anti-Defamation League say they are very disappointed. Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, says nothing from Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg.
They talked about the neutrality of the platforms, but you can't be neutral on extremism or hate. We expect the company to have a zero-tolerance policy on intolerance, just like every other company in America. And today, that's not what we have.
A group says Facebook approached the meeting as a PR exercise. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Ed, thank you. And futures this morning are higher with S&P futures up 5 points, Dow futures up 19, NASDAQ futures up 26, the euro at 1.1281 against the dollar. The yen is at 107.55. And straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
All right, thanks, Karen. It's 5:07 on Wall Street. Now let's get more on what's happening around the world, including the local response to the coronavirus. Here's Bloomberg's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Long Island enters phase 4 of reopening.
I'm placing a new order to sell short euro at 112.81.5. So a new order placed, sell short euro against United States dollar at 112.81.5.
On Monday, the first time since mid-March, it had a rate where each case is causing at least one other new infection. President Trump launched an all-out effort pressing state and local officials to reopen schools this fall, arguing that some are keeping schools closed not because of the risks from the coronavirus, but for political reasons.
We're very much going to put pressure on governors and everybody else to open the schools, to get them open.
However, the president of the nation's largest education union said Trump is more interested in scoring points for the November election than in keeping students safe. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro says he is confident that he will swiftly recover from the novel coronavirus thanks to treatment with hydroxychloroquine. The anti-malaria drug has not been proven effective against COVID-19. Bolsonaro said he tested positive for the virus. President Trump is hosting Mexico's president at the White House during a socially distanced dinner featuring business executives from both countries. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
The Wednesday night event will be the closest thing to a state dinner that can be organized during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sources tell Bloomberg News guests will include some 20 executives representing a variety of industries to mark the launch of the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Pact replacing NAFTA. Mexico's President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador will attend the dinner. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will not. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Daybreak.
Joe Biden won yesterday's Democratic presidential primary in New Jersey. New Jersey Democrats picked educator Amy Kennedy to challenge Republican.
New position open on euro, short 112, 81.5.
In more than 120 countries. Michael Barr, this is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thanks. It's 5:09 on Wall Street, and it's time for the Bernard Accountants and Advisors Sports Report. Here's John Stashower.
All right, Nathan, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver not blind to what's going on with the coronavirus, admits the more cases he hears about, the more worried he is about the NBA's plan to restart the season in Orlando. The Nets among the 22 teams who will be there by tomorrow, but who's left to play for Brooklyn? No Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving. 3 players who were starting when the season was stopped are out. Wilson Chandler, DeAndre Jordan, and now Spencer Dinwiddie, who is having an all-star caliber season. He tested positive for the virus. He hasn't recovered. Doctors advised him not to play. The Nets will battle Orlando and Washington for 2 playoff spots. The Wizards won't have their best player, Bradley Beal. He's got a shoulder injury. Aaron Judge had a rib injury. He says not anymore.
Game ready. Like I told you guys in spring training, I was going to be ready for opening day. So, no, I'm feeling good. I'm not really, the biggest thing now is just getting the reps in, because I missed so many at-bats in the spring training we had. I didn't get all the reps in the outfield, reps on the bases. So for me right now, it's just about getting my timing back in the game and just getting my game reps so we can go out there for the 60 game.
Yankees had an intra-squad game yesterday. Garrett Cole pitched well. They're going to have 3 exhibition games, 2 versus the Mets. And speaking of the Yanks playing the Mets, in 2021, when fans will presumably be back, there'll be a Met-Yankee game at Citi Field on September 11th, 20 years after. Latest sports event to be canceled, the Ryder Cup, which loses a lot without fans. It was to be in September in Wisconsin, so instead, next year, same week, same site. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan.
And John, European soccer clubs expect to lose $4.5 billion in revenue over the next year because of the pandemic. That's according to a study by the European Club Association. The outbreak has affected broadcasting deals around the world and forced games to be played with few or no fans in stadiums. That's hurting club revenue. S&P futures higher by 4 points. Dow futures up 15. NASDAQ futures up 26 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, makes innovation happen. NJIT faculty mentored Christoph Camacho when he was a student, helping him co-found a startup and patent a device that uses drone technology for reforestation and to collect valuable data for land management.
I founded Paratrees back in 2016, taking what I learned from my research at NJIT and migrating it to a startup. Our technology is to really enhance land management operations, so we work very closely with land management companies. So we have a drone that performs precision reforestation, and we do storm damage assessment, having access to drones that can collect data so it's much faster. And what is more important, we help them drive management decisions. NJIT has been there every step of the way, going full force with my company.
Stop on profit for euro at 112.79.5. So I'm placing stop on profit for euro against United States dollar at 112.79.5.
Go
Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/Seize Change.
For the friendships, for the fresh air, for the space to grow, for the knowledge, for the sport, for the outdoor education, for the wide horizons, for the academic excellence, for the future. Unleash your child's education at West Buckland School, a co-educational day and boarding school in beautiful North Devon. If you're moving to the southwest for a better quality of life, this is education without compromise, in what the Good Schools Guide called a gem of a school in an exceptional location. To see for yourself, find us at westbuckland.com.
When you're facing a problem, like how to make an electric car more efficient, you could sit down and talk it through. But at Honda, we decided to listen to the wind tunnel. With wing mirrors? Or without? With? Without? With? Without? Or with cameras instead of wing mirrors? The new Honda E with wing cameras, not mirrors, because we listen to the wind. Honda, the power of dreams.
And action!
I was offered one.
Cut. That's not on the script.
I was offered one. Get in.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was offered one.
Come, boy. I was offered one.
Don't say can't word.
Stop on profit placed at 112.75 on all Euro USD positions.
Led by so many companies that are getting bigger and bigger, and yet there are fewer and fewer of them. Any of that make you nervous?
I mean, look, the strong are getting stronger, and you're...
All positions closed on Euro USD at 112.75.
Across cybersecurity, e-commerce, you're seeing just a lack of secular growth stories.
And you're seeing the rest of this rally through 2020? Or are you looking further out into 2021?
Yeah, I mean, we believe, especially going into next year, there's been a two-phase way that we've sort of, from a client perspective, to play this COVID-19 pandemic and the sell-off. It started in March, April, where you look at these rebound names that can navigate through the storm on cloud, and I think you saw a lot of these multiples re-rate.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. And U.S. futures are little changed this morning as investors weigh prospects for the economy to recover during the pandemic. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. Right now, S&P futures are down about 2 points. Dow futures down 45. NASDAQ futures are up 6. The DAX in Germany is down 0.5%. 10-year Treasury down 3/30 seconds, yield 0.64%. The yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.3% or 12 cents at $40.50 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.1%, up $1.80 at $18.1170 an ounce. The euro 1.1274 against the dollar. British pound 1.2515, and the yen yen 107.58. And today we're watching for a report on consumer credit out at 3 o'clock Wall Street time. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Hospitals being pushed to the brink fighting the coronavirus outbreak. A new model from the University of Washington warns 200,000 Americans could die from coronavirus before Christmas. So far, more than 130,000 people in the U.S. have died from COVID-19. It comes as President Trump is launching an all-out effort to open schools in the fall. We're learning that Chief Justice John Roberts was hospitalized last month for an injury he suffered to his forehead after falling while walking for exercise. Supreme Court spokeswoman Kathy Arberg says Roberts' doctors believe the fall was due to lightheadedness caused by dehydration and have ruled out a seizure. The injury required sutures. Mary Kay Letourneau, the Seattle teacher who was convicted of raping her 12-year-old student and later marrying him in the 90s, has died of cancer at the age of 58. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thank you. It is 5:19 on Wall Street and live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. James Beth.
As you can see, total profit on Euro trade, £710.
Recovery. What is your outlook for equities going forward?
I am surprisingly positive. I accept that the consensus believes that markets are somewhat overbought. I mean, after all, back in February, the S&P stood on a forward price earnings multiple of 19 times. Everybody was said it was due a fall. With the earnings collapse, of course, the forward price earnings multiple is now over 21 times. No surprise, therefore, that people believe that it's due a significant correction. In contrast, however, I do believe that the combined actions of central banks and government mean that we will have very low money rates and extremely low bond yields for an extended period. And therefore, the fair valuation of equities is much higher. I mean, frankly, I would rather have a multiple of the bond yield available from equities, and I get growth in there for nothing. So to me, I am still pro-equity and very cautious on the bond market.
What does the support that we're getting from central banks and the fiscal side do to inflation expectations?
I think that this year is going to be a year of relative disinflation, if not outright deflation. But I think further out there will be an inflationary shock for two reasons. First, it's abundantly clear that central banks would like inflation to rise in order to address the very high levels of indebtedness that are building in the global economy. Secondly, I think from a policy perspective, they are very keen to have a period of above-average inflation to address the challenge that we have had below-average inflation for a very long time. So on that basis, I absolutely believe that inflation is heading higher. Therefore, we need to be focused on companies that have some control of their cost base, as well as the price at which they sell.